Hey guys, welcome back to Emmalition. I'm Emma, this is Emmalition. Today we're going to continue watching some of Vaati's Elden Ring lore videos. You guys have been enjoying these and so have I, so I'm going to continue. VaatiVidya produces some of the most high quality, well thought out, researched lore videos on Elden Ring, and I wanted to share my experience with you guys, so that's what I'm doing. I'm just going through Vaati's Elden Ring lore playlist at the moment, so the next one on the list is the lore of Elden Ring's bosses that served the Golden Order, and hopefully we'll get round to the lore of Elden Ring's Eternal Cities today as well. We shall see. I'm excited to learn some things today. Sit back, enjoy, have a fun time with me.
Many of Elden Ring's bosses serve Marika's Golden Order in some shape or form, whether they're loyal to it or enslaved by it. So let's discuss all of these bosses, starting at a time before Order had even come to the lands between.
Ooh,
to the north
I'm intrigued.
Are mountaintops of the giants, a name that makes it abundantly clear just...
Okay, we're 20 seconds into the video, but I just wanted to say Mountaintops of the Giants, my least favourite place in the whole of Elden Ring. Not one thing is redeemable about that place for me.
Who dominated this region of the world. However, it was not always this way. According to the Borealis's mist incantation, the ice dragons were once lords of the mountaintops long ago, until they were defeated by the fire giants and chased from the peak. And perched upon this peak stands an enormous forge. Interestingly, the chain rings of this forge depict dragons, which might be a reference to the dragons that once dwelt here.
That's cool. I never would have noticed that.
I don't think we can say for sure who built this forge. The art of smithing is said to have originated among the giants, and the craft was even once considered divine. So, it seems likely that at the very least, they made good use of this fire.
Very cool.
Sparks from this forge would fall down and fertilize the smoldering flowers that bloomed upon the mountaintops, and it seems like it was a pretty crucial part of life in this region. The most ancient giants here were called fire giants, and according to the Burn O' Flame incantation, they have long held a solitary curse to serve as keepers of the flame for eternity. Now, traditionally, in From Software games, curses are the domain of the gods, and indeed, the fire giants are cited to have borrowed power from one such god, who is represented here by a single large red eye. This god is called a god of the flame, and it's believed to be able to inhabit fire itself, as well as the bodies of the fire giants who worshipped it. The giants shared borders with the astrologers, who, according to their legendary Sword of Night and Flame...
This path, sorry, I'm not about to say anything particularly intelligent or astute, but this path here, was this not terrifying to anyone else? Like, genuinely, when you had to run across this and you were getting things launched at you, like, scary, very scary. Also, I just have to say that it immediately crossed my mind when it spoke about the God of Flame being able to inhabit fire itself. I started thinking, wow, like, that's so conceptual, so abstract. And then I remembered that the last video was when I learned about the concept of deities not being tangible things, and I decided not to say anything. So we shall continue nonetheless. I will stop myself.
Established themselves in the mountaintops and considered the fire giants their neighbors. The relationship here is implied to be friendly, even collaborative, maybe, as the sword does combine the power of both flame and the power of the primeval current that's glimpsed within the night sky. The sword would go on to become a treasure of the Carian royal family, and the Carians themselves are likely descendants of the astrologers. Generations later, these Carian royals would call upon their old giant allies for aid, but we'll get to that in a moment. The fire giants also had another neighbor, with whom relations were not so amicable. Further down the mountains, just past the Forbidden Lands, roamed the Knights of Zamor. According to their armor, these long-lived warriors, clad in biting, freezing winds, are said to have been the mortal enemies of the fire giants since time immemorial. According to their weaponry, these beings were devoted to winter itself, and had weapons styled after icy winds and bodies that were cloaked in swirling ice storms. It makes good sense that such cold beings would be natural mortal enemies of the fire giants,
beings.
and they commonly did
sense.
challenge their larger rivals. But it seems like their true chance came when Queen Marika waged war against the fire giants.
Again, Marika is the problem here. She waged war against the fire giants, but why? To take control of the lands between, right? But it seems like she created civil war as a result of being power hungry and greedy, which is a shame, really, because she's a bad seed. She's a bad seed.
The Knights of Zamor gladly joined her offensive. They earned great renown amongst the Order of the Erd Tree, and many ancient heroes of Zamor became hailed as heroes, as the fire giants were largely wiped from the face of the earth after this war. Now, up until now, I've resisted calling the giants evil, but the reality is that in pretty much every item description, their god is described as a fell god, and the giant's flame is a flame of ruin. And to be fair, their god doesn't seem like a super nice guy. I mean, it only really opens its eye when the fire giant boss sacrifices a leg, which is pretty metal.
Ooh.
But I'm sort of giving them the benefit of the doubt because I think it's pretty clear who's writing the history about this fell god here.
Yeah.
The many mentions of this god as evil clearly come about because fire itself was just this extremely taboo topic during Marika's Age of the Erd Tree. And it's not just Giant's Flame items that mention this. Fire in general was prohibited to those who served the Erd Tree, which was a pretty smart defensive measure, especially considering that many rival outer gods also have a flame of their own. The Formless Mother has Blood Flame, the Three Fingers have Frenzied Flame, the outer god of death has Ghost Flame, but Giant's Flame in particular was capable of burning the Erd Tree, and that is a fact that clearly inspired the inevitable war with the giants.
So I do get that, to be fair. If Marika knows that there is this Giant's Flame that has a guaranteed ability to destroy the Erd Tree, which obviously we see in Elden Ring, then I get why she would want to wage war on them. But I don't know, it's kind of sad, isn't it, when you're climbing the mountaintops of the giants and there's like all of the like frozen corpses of giants just sort of left out to die. I don't know, it's a little bit depressing. I think the whole thing is depressing, that anyone who remotely threatened or opposed Marika's order was shunned or killed. But yeah, this is interesting. I hadn't actually given much thought to the fire giants, really, so this is quite cool. Intrigued to see where this goes.
So the giants were deemed mortal enemies of the Erd Tree, and they allegedly desolated nature, triggered avalanches, and whipped up storms of flame with their roars. Clearly those who served the Erd Tree were afraid, and perhaps rightfully so.
Yeah, I
and
get
so,
that, maybe.
led by Lord Godfrey, the forces of the Erd Tree went to war. The fire giants borrowed from the power of the fell god to fight against the Erd Tree, but were defeated nonetheless. According to the Burn O' Flame incantation, this released the fire giants from their curse to serve as keepers of the flame, all except one, who the fell god still hides within. And upon realizing that the giant's flame would never die, Marika left this last giant alive, knowing it was bound to protect the flame for all eternity.
That's cruel.
And thus leaving it cursed.
That's
cursed
really
to
cruel.
protect the flame from someone like us. In addition to the Knights of Zamor, many lesser giants were also roped into the war against the fire giants. These lesser giants are called trolls, and are confirmed to be a race that is descended from the giants. This relationship is clearer at the mountaintops, where the trolls here still cast Giant's Flame incantations. Troll hammers were even once used as ancient ceremonial smithing tools. Thus, it seems evident that the trolls and the fire giants coexisted for a time, and then fell further and further apart. Because while some trolls are assumedly still fire giants at heart, many now are not. In fact, at the heart of most trolls is nothing. There's this suspicious hollow here, almost as if something has been ripped out of their torso.
Ooh.
And when you consider what's upon the torso of the last remaining fire giant, the truth becomes...
No way. Oh my god. I'd been thinking when you face these trolls, because you face them really early on, right? Like they're all over Limgrave. Why are there goddamn intestines on show? Are they meant to have eyes in there? That's kind of disgusting. That's vile, actually. Ew.
Pretty clear, right? Every single troll is now missing that giant eye of their outer god.
Whoa.
And if you manage to look really closely here at a troll, we realize that in its place is this strange stone tablet that is held in
never
place
noticed that
by
before.
what look like roots.
What?
As pointed out by Quelaag, these rooted tablets are very reminiscent of the rooted shackles that were created to bind the Omen twins, Mohg and Morgoth, which might suggest that the trolls are also being shackled or suppressed by Marika in some way. This is just speculation, of course, but Marika does have this suspicious set of stone tablets in her chambers, and I think it's a good theory, for sure. A sword gravestone in the mountaintops elaborates further on the trolls' role in the War of the Giants. Here, champions battled, and allegedly, the trolls betrayed. What was the nature of this betrayal? Did these lesser giants resent their larger kin? Or did Marika force this betrayal in some way with the stone shackles?
Probably.
I think
She's
that's largely up to
salty
you guys.
AF.
But whatever the case, nowadays the trolls are said to have lost their minds and are inseparable from the weight of their rusty swords, which have long since lost any trace of gold. So whether they carry coffins or mine down...
I don't know if Vaati is going to get into this. It seems like maybe he's just about to, but one thing that I wondered from the start of playing Elden Ring, like I'm talking right from the network test, is why, or the circumstances around the trolls that pull along these carts that are on screen now. Like they've been enslaved by people in Limgrave. So it made me wonder how that happened, because they're very imposing and large enemies. So it just made me wonder how people managed to wrangle them and get them to essentially become slaves to their labor and the mining endeavors, it seems. I don't know if he's going to touch on that, but maybe he will. I don't know. That just intrigued me, I think, as a bit of environmental storytelling.
Down at the bedrock of the earth, their sad state brings to mind enslavement now, more than anything else. That said, some trolls do seem to have a little bit more dignity, and these are the ones that fought against the Erd Tree later on. These were the enchanted troll knights, deemed comrades of the young Renala.
I don't think I ever saw
They were
one
called
of
into
those.
service when the Queen invoked an oath that they swore long ago. As mentioned earlier, the trolls go way back to when the fire giants and the astrologers were still neighbors, and back then it seems, for whatever reason, they swore an oath to the astrologers. And later, when the Carrions went to war against the Erd Tree, I assume, the trolls were finally called into that service to be treated as true knights of Carrion.
Oh, wow.
Wielding swords embedded with blue glintstone and summoning enormous glint blades, they fought arm in arm with their long-lost human comrades.
That's quite nice.
Iji is another such example of that relationship, by the way. He became the Carrion family's royal blacksmith, and unlike the Stone Digger trolls, he actually uses that weapon for its intended purpose as a blacksmith's hammer. And now he serves the Lady Rani, who he's known ever since her childhood. Next, I want to talk about the Knights Cavalry. These recurring bosses wander the dim roads at night, and were once led by the Fell Omen. Now, this description specifically references Margit's title as the Fell Omen, not Morgoth's title as the Omen King, and I think this is important because Margit represents this undercover extension of Morgoth, who scouts further out in the world and takes out champions who approach all the way from Stormvale Castle. Morgoth's big role in the story is that he's a stout defender of the Erd Tree who wouldn't dare betray the Golden Order. He calls all the other demigods willful traitors all, simply for fighting over the great runes of the Elden Ring.
I still find it interesting, like, that Morgott is, like, so ride or die for the Erd Tree when he represents everything the Golden Order disdain, because he's an omen. That's still an interesting
Even
conversation for me.
Radahn, who has a lot of signs of being quite loyal to the Golden Order, is called a traitor, simply because he fights at one stage another character who has a great rune. You can even see Morgott in one of these opening cutscene cinematics leaping onto what looks like Radahn, and managing to even get an attack off on one of the mightiest of the demigods. Actually, a channel named Smotown has a really good little video discussing whether this is indeed Radahn.
Or maybe we should check that out after.
You go and check that out. Anyway, my point is, the Knights Cavalry seem to fulfill a similar role to Margit. According to their armor, they were deliverers of death for great warriors, knights, and champions. Simple as that. No motive is listed, except that they have a reputation for taking out the greatest warriors of the world.
Very cool.
And that makes sense that would be their aim, because only the strongest can acquire 2 great runes and approach the Erd Tree, so it's almost as if strength itself must be stifled so that Morgott's failing order might be maintained. As for why Margit defends Stormvale, I like to think that he's fighting here because he recognizes that Godric is the weakest of the demigods, who yet remains, so he's bolstering his strength in that sense and trying to maintain this unsteady stalemate. Having a strong defense is essentially the guiding principle of those who serve the Erd Tree, especially as you get closer to the capital. There are numerous examples of this. The soldiers of Leyndell fight their battles defensively. The knights of Leyndell always put their shield before the sword, and Leyndell itself, the city, is built to withstand siege, with layers and layers of defensive measures built in. And the protective standard to which all defenders of the Erd Tree aspire is that of the Tree Sentinels, whose order became the living rampart of the Erd.
These are some of the coolest enemies for me, because I think lore-wise they're so interesting, but, like, look how cool they look. Like, that just absolutely golden adorned armor on the horse, on them, the halberd, the shield. It's so cool. And I think for me, I just love them so much because it's the first boss you come across, right, in Limgrave, and then there's this very, like, Souls thing that it does where you overcome the Tree Sentinel, you think, awesome, great, you're down, and then there's so many more of them in the game. What have you got? 2 leading to Leyndell, and then the Draconic Tree Sentinel as well, then 1 right before Malekith, and it's that very typical Souls thing, like I said, of giving you what feels like the hardest enemy you've ever fought really early on in the game. For example, the Capra demon in Dark Souls 1, you think, what the hell, that was the most janky fight, horrible boss I've ever fought, and then boom, there's like 20 Capra demons later on in the game. Very similar with Tree Sentinels, and I just think that's a really nice thing that Souls games do anyway. But I think Tree Sentinels are just so cool. So I don't know what my point was. I just wanted to say that I like them, and I'm excited to find out more about what they're doing with their time.
Embellished with golden tree-crested armor and shields that can retaliate with bolts of light. They turn defense into offense. And that's the idea in Leyndell. Defense is the best offense, and the way this idea is presented is just such beautiful storytelling. So many characters in other areas of the lands between long to return to the blessed land of the Erd Tree, and even for you it's this goal that looms over you the entire game. So the path is designed to repel everyone getting close. You know, the highway through Leonia has fallen apart, so you need to take this secret, waterlogged route up through the mountain. This was my favorite part of the game, by the way, finding this secret path through the mountains and infiltrating the Altus Plateau. And then when you finally get there, there are countless ballista and golem archers, and they're all positioned facing outwards. And finally, you even find a side entrance to Leyndell, and that is even guarded by a tree sentinel. And it's not just any tree sentinel. This one is actually a draconic tree sentinel, which is kind of different. This variant of sentinels arose after the ancient dragons attacked Leyndell in its history, and we talk more about this event in the video about the demigods, but in the end, the ancient dragons were befriended, and worship of the ancient dragons was deemed acceptable.
Another
alongside
unlikely
belief
friendship
in the
in
Erd
Elden
Tree.
Ring.
Dragons were conjoined with the Golden Order, so to speak, and the dragon
cool.
cultists took after them in a physical fashion. Also instrumental to the rise of the Erd Tree were the Crucible Knights. They were eventually scorned for their strength, for their appearance, and for their close resemblance to chaos, and how that inspired who they originally were. 16 of these knights served Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, and all 16 of them yet remain across the lands between. One is imprisoned in an Everjail, 2 appear to be dead and are summoned to fight you as spirits. A number of Crucible Knights still patrol Leyndell, some protect great tree roots, though most just stand dejected in lost corners of the earth, and one of them has even found a new blasphemous master. So the next time you fight these, think carefully about where they are and who they're fighting with, because each knight is a distinct character with purpose, or lack thereof, even though they were all once united by...
It's really interesting to me how, like, the Crucible Knights will still defend the Golden Order and will still defend the Erd Tree, even though they're dejected because of their appearance and their resemblance to chaos and their connections to the Great Tree. It's not unlike Morgott in that sense. Feels like a bit of Stockholm Syndrome, bit of proving yourself. I don't know, it's sad. It's sad, actually.
A common purpose and a single lord. Many of these knights fight with different aspects of the Crucible. Some fight with wings, some with horns, fire, and tail, but what they all have in common is their mastery of their Lord Godfrey's signature stomp attack, which breaks up the earth beneath their feet. This is such a cool homage to Godfrey. You know, knowing the lore is great. It definitely makes dying to it feel a little bit better, right? Anyway, I think it's important to remember that Godfrey and his Crucible Knights existed in an age before the Erd Trees, an age with the Great Tree in its primordial form, back when there was this red-tinted crucible of life, and these were warriors who drew power from its chaos. Eventually, however, they were brought on board with order, which is better.
I'm really glad that we've watched all of these lore videos in order so we can understand all of these references. So like the Great Tree and the red grace light and things. So if you haven't watched any of those, please go back, because I want you to learn with me, because I understand what Vaati is saying. I feel like if you don't, this is going to be very confusing. So definitely go back if you don't know what I'm talking about.
Best exemplified by Godfrey being tamed by the beast regent upon his back. There are 2 types of ornamentation that the Crucible Knights can have. There's axe ornamentation, which is worn by Crucible Knight Ordovus and his men, and I think the axe is a bit of a homage to Godfrey again. And then there are some knights that have Great Tree ornamentation, and these are displayed by the Knight Siluria and her men, which is of course a reference to the Great Tree itself.
Nice.
And I'd like to quickly talk about the Great Tree. In one of my first lore videos, I proposed that there was a great tree that must have existed before the Erd Tree, and that the Erd Tree might have even replaced this great tree. This was based on the English root resin item description, which has the word Great Tree capitalized and as one word, which certainly makes you think that it's a distinct tree, right? The line is, "The roots of the Great Tree once linked to those of the Erd Tree," which is a line that seems to clearly set up that these are 2 separate trees. Except the Japanese translation doesn't say that. The Japanese translation says, "These roots are said to have once been connected to the Golden Tree."
No.
It does mention the Great Tree earlier, but it seems to just be referencing the Erd Tree as that Great Tree, because it is a really big tree. Some people have taken this to mean that there was no Great Tree before the Erd Tree, and you know, while that's certainly possible, I do think it's still fair to argue that a Great Tree existed before.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm wondering if there's like a misinterpretation with the translation of what the Japanese text says there, because I feel like From Software aren't dumb, right? And I feel that they would understand that capitalizing Great Tree as one phrase multiple times in a description would heavily imply to an English reader that that is a thing and an object, not a slang term for just generic tree roots. So I think I heavily believe in the Great Tree theory, but maybe I just really want to believe in the Great Tree. I don't know.
For the Erd Tree, for one, many of the Crucible Knight items reference a primordial form of the Erd Tree, and they have ornamentation and history that is based on this primordial holiness that is not the holiness of the Erd Tree. So calling it a Great Tree might just be referencing that tree. And secondly, Siluria defends a giant tree in the Deeproot Depths. It's one that has this hollowed out entrance that is reminiscent of the entrance at the Erd Tree as well.
Remember that.
So maybe there's something here. I just kind of wanted to set that straight for now. But the reality is that we don't really know for sure, and hopefully DLC will shed a light on some of these past ages of the world, which seems to be a common trend with From Software DLC, and there just really are so many remnants of previous ages in this game, and I'd love to see a little bit more about what their cultures really were like. It kind of makes you resent just how all-encompassing the Erd Tree became. So many of these cultures have been lost, and I guess that's how a lot of characters in game feel as well. They feel upset by that, and knowing this fact helps you understand why so many of these characters are okay with burning down the Erd Tree.
The Erd Tree
totally
is
fine
like
with that.
colonization,
and this brings us to
right?
our next boss, because
A little bit.
in the act of burning down the Erd Tree, you release a slew of ulcerated tree spirits.
What's up with these guys?
These spirits lie suffering beneath the ash until you come along. But of course you fight many of these tree spirits across the Lands Between, even before the end game. There's an ulcerated tree spirit at the husk of this minor Erd Tree, there's a bunch in catacomb dungeons.
The worst ulcerated tree spirit for me was the one just before Millennia. I can't remember what it's called, like the rot swamp area inside... Oh, what the hell was it called? You know, just before Millennia's boss room, right? There's the ulcerated tree spirit where you take the Millicent quest line. That was the worst one because it was like you got rotted or you got knocked off the cliff. The only way I was able to beat him was through like a series of great arrows. It was embarrassing. Okay, I'm not proud of it. Oh, God. This is going to make me feel sad now, isn't it?
Great tree roots. There's even one at the husk of the Halig tree.
That's it, the Halig tree.
A lot of these. Some might even say there's too many of these bosses. I think they're the worst boss in Elden Ring. But anyway,
Thank you,
understanding
Vaati.
their lore might make it a bit more palatable. So, while these creatures fight near the trees, I don't think they're defending them. Rather, I kind of think they're this corrupted byproduct of dead or dying trees. We know that one of the new purposes of the Erd Tree is to accept spirits and allow them to live on, and it's almost like these ulcerated spirits are this horrific failure of that process.
Oh, that's sad.
One of Miyazaki's favorite themes in these games is the idea that life is not supposed to be eternal, and I think these spirits are a physical manifestation of stagnation and decay. They're this product of an age of an Erd Tree that really should have ended a long time ago.
This is what
Most tree
happens when you
spirits
pray
drop
for
golden
immortality,
seeds,
sort of
which
thing.
are also found at the base of smaller illusory trees, and they read, "When the Elden Ring was shattered, these seeds flew from the Erd Tree, scattering across the various lands, as if life itself knew that its end had come." A talisman also goes on to say, "The Erd Tree was once perfect and eternal, and thus it was believed that Erd Tree seeds could not exist."
Oh, that's interesting.
This was
I
back
didn't
when
think
there was an
about that.
age of plenty, when blessings literally dripped from the boughs of the Erd Tree like sap, and the Erd Tree's warm light healed those who bathed in its rays. The Erd Tree flourished with abundance, yet it was only for a fleeting moment. Such is the course of all life.
God,
Then
that's
the
interesting.
leaves began to fall, and as you know from the introduction and the endings, the fallen leaves tell a story. The story is that the Erd Tree was withering. Scattered across the Lands Between are minor Erd Trees, where you go to collect crystal tears. Basins were placed at the feet of minor Erd Trees in order to collect these tears, though in some cases these tears are dropped by Erd Tree avatars instead. When the Elden Ring was shattered, the avatars emerged, wielding ceremonial staffs that depict the Erd Tree in its historic radiance. These creatures are the will of the dying Erd Tree, made manifest, I think. They are literally part tree, after all, and they fight desperately to protect the minor Erd Trees, which are the offspring of the withering Erd Tree itself. Some avatars, placed in Caelid and Miquella's Halig Tree, are rotten avatars, and they even have this uniquely designed staff that festers with rot, just as they do. Remember that Halig Tree is also an emulation of the Erd Tree, so it makes sense that it has its own avatars as well.
Makes sense.
They fight on, because to many of these creatures, any Erd Tree, whether it's minor or a copy or doomed, is something worth protecting.
I mean, that's sweet, right?
If you've made
That's
it all the way
nice.
to the end of this video, then chances are you love this kind of long-form content.
I do.
So an
Thank
Audible
you, Vaati.
subscription might also be just right for you.
Right, well, I'm going to stop his ad read because Audible aren't paying me. But thank you, Vaati. That was awesome. I think I had less to say in that because, I don't know, it just felt like a lot to digest maybe that I hadn't necessarily thought about. Like, I think I've had a lot to say in the last few videos because it's things I've thought about a lot and characters I've thought about a lot, such as Millennia. And I've had a couple of ideas relating to some of the topics, whereas that was all kind of new to me. And I do like how Vaati touched on characters and bosses that I haven't thought about really, like the Knights Cavalry. I gotta say, I killed a couple, but I mostly just ran away from all of the Knights Cavalry. Similar to the Deathbirds, I just couldn't be bothered to fight them at the time. So it was really, really interesting to find out a bit more about some things I hadn't necessarily thought about a whole lot. So that was really, really cool. I don't feel like I have a lot to add in terms of my thoughts, if I'm honest with you. I think it's just raised more points about the Great Tree and like the history of the world. Again, I think I found the fire giant part the most interesting, and I feel a little bit sad about the fire giants because I think they've been demonized in all of the flavor text of the items and descriptions, but I can't seem to find a very good reason why. There's not really any proof that they're evil other than that they kind of wield fire in a skillful way. It seems again like Marika's way of demonizing people that go against her or threaten her will. I think this is going to become an anti-Marika channel very soon. I also really want to check out the lore of Elden Ring's Eternal Cities, so let's do that now.
I think everyone had this moment in Elden Ring. You find a building hidden in the forest of Limgrave's Mistwood, and the door mysteriously opens of its own volition to reveal an elevator. Down.
Yes.
It just keeps going and going, on and on until you forget that you're...
So sorry to pause literally like 15 seconds into this video, but yes, this I assume is a universally held feeling when you first happen upon Seifra River. But I feel really grateful to have made a Let's Play of Elden Ring because I was able to capture my reaction on camera and I'll remember it forever, which is really nice. Like, it's a nice thing to have. But yeah, I'm sure Vaati's about to go into it, but that feeling of just wonderment and pure awe and overwhelming joy and this feeling of the sublime and the purple sky and the stars, and you just, it's just incredible. Like, I don't think I'll ever feel that again about anything. I genuinely don't.
You're even underground. The cavernous roof is now so far above that it might as well be a false night sky. And the world below has life, light, and a culture of its own.
Incredible moment.
What's interesting about the environment down here is that it's actually a fusion of cultures. There are the dynastic remains infested with claymen, and then there's the ancestral grounds brimming with wildlife. But built amidst it all, between the ruins, beyond the ancestral grounds, and even hanging from the ceilings, are the incredible Eternal Cities inhabited by the Nox. For now, think of the Nox as just these enemies. the monks, swordstresses, and night maidens of the eternal cities.
Put the titles on.
The word nox means night in Latin. Some of you might remember this from the phrase Verio Nox in Dark Souls, which was commonly held to mean fear the night.
I don't think I remember that.
This theme has carried over to Elden Ring, where fear and respect for the night is conveyed by characters like Rani, who seek to usher in an age of stars.
Nice.
Here beginneth the chill night that encompasses all,
Oh, the best
reaching
ending.
the great beyond. Into fear, doubt, and loneliness.
And just like the Age of Dark in Dark Souls, the coming Age of Stars is presented as a bit of an inevitability in Elden Ring. Or at least it might have been, were it not for Star-Scourge Radahn, who locked the stars out of motion and
That
fettered the
goddamn
fate
Radahn.
once writ in the night sky on behalf of the Golden Order. Again, this is just like in Dark Souls, where the coming Age of Dark was stolen from mankind by a greater power. Yet, even now, the Age of Stars continues to be championed by a people called the Nox. Except now, the Nox have been banished to the underground, and here they live in this state of eternal...
I don't know yet, and I'm sure we'll find out, but I wonder if there's any correlation between the Nox and the like being banished underground and the Omens being banished underground to like the subterranean shunning grounds. Like, I wonder if we're going to find any parallels or similarities there between people who were, shunned away from the Order, so to speak.
Anticipation, just endlessly waiting for a fate that has been taken away from them. We're never explicitly told which act it was that led to the Nox's banishment, but my best guess is that it has to do with this, the Fingerslayer blade,
Ooh,
which
a
we loot
Fingerslayer.
beneath the giant's throne
That makes sense.
in Nokron. A part of its description reads, "This blood-drenched fetish is proof of the high treason committed by the Eternal City and symbolizes its downfall."
Oh.
So, what was the nature of the Nox's high treason, then? Well, this is a Fingerslayer blade, one that is able to harm the Greater Will and its vassals. This blade is drenched in blood and proof of high treason, so it seems like the weapon was successfully used, but we can only really speculate on which pair of two fingers this blade might have been used on. Of course, it might have just been high treason to create this blade in the first place. This weapon is said to be born of a corpse, so let's take a closer look at its icon. Doing so reveals a spine running up the blade and two arms that form the hilt. So clearly this weapon is born of a corpse, but it's not the only weapon in game
Gross.
that's like this. Remember that moment at the end of the game where the Elden Beast reaches into the ground and pulls a sword from Radagon's corpse? That is the sacred relic sword, and it too is a spined spiral blade with a human forming the hilt. So to some in this item's
What? Is it?
is born of a corpse,
Sorry,
but
what?
it's not the only weapon in game that's like this.
A
Remember that
human?
moment at the end of the game where the Elden Beast reaches into the ground and pulls a sword from Radagon's corpse? That is the sacred relic sword, and it too is a spined spiral blade with a human forming the hilt. So to some in this item's description, this weapon represents the end of an age, and to others, the beginning.
Oh,
Now,
heck.
I kind of doubt
That's
that the
gross.
Fingerslayer blade is made from a corpse that's as powerful as Radagon, just because it seems so much smaller, broken, and limp. But
I
regardless,
think the Fingerslayer blade, like, there's probably absolutely nothing to this, but it kind of reminds me of Rykard. Like, the whole aesthetic of it just reminds me of Rykard. Like, I can't explain.
it
Don't
clearly
make me
was an
explain.
attempt
It just
to
does.
bring about the end of one age and the beginning of another. Just so, the Fingerslayer blade can only be wielded by Rani, who needs the weapon to claim her fate and achieve her ending.
Nice.
This can only happen when you defeat Radahn and unlock the fate in the night sky, because doing so sets free a star from the cosmos, which crashes into Limgrave, revealing the path to Nokron, the Eternal City, where the Fingerslayer blade lies hidden.
This is
There are multiple
madness.
eternal cities that are spread widely across the lands between and located deep beneath the earth. First, we have the city of Nokron that lies beneath Limgrave. The entrance to this city is torn open by Ridan's meteorite when we explore it, so all of the foremost buildings are ruined, but they form the path leading to this undisturbed, multi-layered city that's sort of tucked behind the dynastic remains and the ancestral environs that were built here long before. Then there's Nokron's twin, the city of Nokstella, which is located beneath Liurnia. I think most people would have got their first hint of this city when they wound up in the Ainsel River fighting the Dragonkin soldier.
I feel like this video is going to be more me talking about my personal experience with Elden Ring rather than giving any sort of philosophical or interesting input. But when you first enter this boss room, were you not so convinced that the said skeletal giant on the chair was going to be the boss? And then when the dragon came down, I've never been so surprised. I was like, oh, okay. Okay, then.
Nokstella. But the true city is further up from here, stretching out between long sections of ant-infested tunnels. Here, the Nox have actually learned how to ride these ants, though the ants will happily turn on them if given the chance. But there's a third city, a completely devastated, nameless city located beneath Lane Dell, which is a place we'll have to talk about a little bit later in this video. These three cities just have incredible architecture. I love Nokron's massive inverted towers, and it's cool how Nokstella's shining city is built right into this low-hanging false night sky. Now, the game isn't really clear on whether these cities existed before the Nox's banishment underground, or if they were built afterwards. However, I'm inclined to think that they actually existed before their banishment. Take the Fingerslayer Blade's description, for instance. This weapon is the most likely reason for the Nox's banishment, and it lays the high treason at the feet of the Eternal City. It doesn't blame the Nox, who would have existed above ground at some point. It blames the Eternal City. But regardless, while they at least might have already had these well-developed cities down here, their banishment was still a brutal punishment, because the Nox would have been cut off from the true night sky, which was a core part of their culture. As some small comfort, I speculate that they...
So, I don't know if Vaati, again, is going to get into this, but they were cut off from the true night sky. So, what they're looking at is the false night sky. But does that mean that somehow the world caved in on them and cities were built over them to stop them seeing the real sky? Do you kind of get where I'm coming from? Or, because I don't see how that's possible, actually. I don't know what point I'm making. Let's carry on for now.
Created these false night skies, which are made of suspended white fragments.
The false night skies.
They accept as they wait for the Age of Stars.
But if they existed at the same time as Lanedale, then surely Lanedale would have been on top of them. So how could they have ever seen the real night sky if they always existed below the cities above ground that we all know of? I'm not sure on that one. I'm a wee bit confused. Just a wee bit. Just a tiny little bit.
To begin. In order to learn more about these cities, though, I'd like to look at some data mined information.
Data?
Of course, you have to take this with a grain of salt.
Data?
In version 1.0 of Elden Ring, the Eternal City buildings are frequently listed as Marika's ruins. And the Eternal City pavilions are Marika's pavilions. What's more, the Nox themselves are actually called Marika's descendants. This obviously has pretty huge implications.
Yeah, this changes things.
Let's try to break down Marika's ancestry and see if we can arrive at the Nox. So, Marika herself is of the Numen race, who, according to the character creation screen, are supposed descendants of denizens of another world. The only other supposed Numen in-game are the Black Knife Assassins, who, according to their silver armor, were all women and rumored to be Numen, who had close ties with Marika herself. And we have proof that these Numen Black Knives were tied to the Eternal Cities.
They say the assassins who carried out the deed were scions of the Eternal City.
So if we take Roger at his word, then
Roger?
it seems like Newman are indeed tied up with the genealogy of the Eternal City, and that Marika herself is likely one of the Nox's ancestors.
What?
You could go as far as to say that Marika is actually from an Eternal City too. She is called the Eternal, after all. But again, remember this is data mined information that we're not really supposed to know. But at any rate, while
Yeah,
the
but
Nox
that's
might be
cool.
descended from the Newman, I think
What?
enough time has passed that most Nox aren't really considered
Yeah.
Newman anymore. If anything, they're now more akin to the Night Folk, which is actually another descendancy you can choose for your Tarnished in the character creator. Night Folk and Nox share similarly hued skin, and Night Folk are a race that was said to bleed silver long ago.
Whoa. Bleed silver, that's kind of like the mimics, right? The mimics are like silver blood.
So let's finally actually talk about the Nox monks, the priestesses,
I'm
the Night
fascinated
Maidens,
by this,
and
guys.
the
Sorry.
silver that they wield.
Just to warn you, if I don't say a word for the next 25 minutes, I'm sorry. It's just because I'm so fascinated and I'm really enjoying this because, again, I haven't got a clue about any of this. The Nox would have never even crossed my mind. I think as an Elden Ring fan and as someone who tries to be active in the community, I only ever really think about the main bosses and the main characters. I would never dive into this much depth on the Noxes and the Eternal City. This is like a full education for me. I feel like I need to graduate or something from like Elden Ring school.
The monks of the Eternal Cities are all men, and they fight with flowing weapons of liquid metal. So too do the Swordstresses, a female caste of the Nox who are agile warriors and serve as the personal guards of the Night Maidens. The Night Maidens themselves are said to be of the highest clerical rank, and it's definitely interesting that a group of maidens would be of the highest clerical rank. It's almost as if the Night Maidens exist as a sort of parallel to the Kindling Maidens of the Two Fingers, who serve the Tarnished so that they might become Lord. Because remember, a core part of the Nox culture is also about searching for a Lord to serve. Except unlike the title Elden Lord, the Nox are waiting for a Lord of Night. In a way, this Lord of Night is almost an imitation of the Elden Lord, which would make sense because the Nox are extremely well versed in the art of imitation. So let's talk about that. I think I speak for a lot of us here when I say that a core part of so many of our late game playthroughs were the Mimic tier Spirit Ashes, which copied the form of their summoner. And from a lore point of view, the whole point of this Mimic tier is actually to mimic the Tarnished who might become the Elden Lord. Its description reads, Mimic tiers are a result of an attempt by the Eternal City to forge a Lord. However, the description also says that their mimicry does not extend to imitating the summoner's will. This makes it seem like Mimic tiers are this tool, right? They're something to be used to achieve the Eternal City's ends. So it's important to point out here that Mimic tiers are actually more accurately Silver tiers, and Silver tiers literally are tools, because they're wielded by the Nox as weapons.
God, this is madness.
The Nox flowing hammer and the Nox flowing sword are forged from the liquid metal of Silver tiers and tempered to hardness. This gives them the ability to extend, bend, and when wielded by the Nox, to drastically change their form into spiked shields and even giant hands. And what's kind of chilling to realize is that these weapons are actually living beings. This is all quite clearly inspired by ancient alchemical conceptions of mercury, or quicksilver, which was this compound that was believed to be able to shift between liquid and solid states, as well as life and death. In-game, Silver tiers are called formless life, able to be reborn again and again into imitation. They are as much a substance as they are a living organism, and we see this in their multitude of forms. Silver spheres, trolls, and even nightfolk, to name but a few. There's even this entire cut questline that would have had you bond with a silver mimic tier called Asimi. In the cut dialogue files, this mimic tier claims to have grown a desire for life and knowledge and lordship, and she desires to share the throne with you.
You could have become Elden Lord, and I could have become Sovereign Eternal.
I think, and I know a lot of
Another
you guys
Welsh
did as well
character
when I
gone.
mentioned this last time, I think this would have gone a really long way towards making players relate to the story of the Nox, and it would have made...
Yeah, I do agree with what Vaati is saying here. I feel like they kind of skim over the Nox a fair bit, which is fine. Like, it's not necessarily an integral, like, cornerstone of the game. But, I mean, like he rightly said, we all relied on the Mimic tier so much. It might have been nice to just have a little more exposition. I think that side quest would have been really interesting, actually. It's kind of messed up that these silver tears, this silver matter is life born and born again, but is made into commodity and tools, like the weapons, like that kind of threaded cane looking thing, and the sickle. That is so messed up, and it's kind of, I guess, reminiscent of the way they treat the trolls as well, as kind of commodity, to move their things around Limgrave. So yeah, definitely a little bit sad. Again, everything in these games just makes you feel a bit sad when you learn more about it, doesn't it?
Made them question the Order of the Erd Tree even more. And after learning about this questline, I can definitely see why Mimic Tears and artificial life might have been this enormous threat to the Erd Tree's authority. The Nox were, after all, messing with these crucial things that the Erd Tree had come to govern. They were messing
Life
with
and
the
death,
powers
right?
of life, death, and rebirth.
I told you!
Of course, we know that death was sacrosanct to the Erd
Vaati,
Tree
if you ever
during
need an
its age.
assistant, I'm
As I
available.
discussed in my video on death, many ancient methods of death came to be abandoned or shunned in favor of returning to the Erd Tree's roots instead, through the process of Erd Tree burial. All the old ways of death were abandoned. And as for rebirth, well, the Erd Tree is never really explicitly said to be able to rebirth beings. I think a lot of people just assume that it's implied.
Yeah.
But there is a bit of evidence. Many depictions of the Erd Tree actually show human forms growing along its branches, just as they show human forms being absorbed in death by its roots. And you can't forget that an entire great rune of the Elden Ring explicitly governs rebirth. This is Renala's Amber Egg, and inside it is the great rune of the Unborn.
Very good point, actually.
In the end, Lady Renala was left alone. Cradle.
Can we just talk about how the subtitles said Lady Ronaldo? Very different game.
The Amber Egg Lord Radagon bequeathed her. Now she devotes herself to it through forbidden rite, the grim art of reincarnation.
I think Miriel calls Renala's reincarnation a grim act here, because reincarnation already has a bit of a history with the Nox in the Lands Between. And Renala isn't the Erd Tree, so I can see how what she's doing might be a bit sacrilegious. She's even capable of using larval tears.
I guess if she is directly opposing the order of life and death as governed by the Golden Order and Marika and the runes, her ability to control reincarnation and kind of control a part of life and death would be seen as sacrilegious, right? And again, a threat, which makes me wonder if that's why Marika and then eventually Radagon sought to destroy Renala, emotionally tear apart her whole Carrion society, because again, she was a direct threat to the Order if they want to be the ones that control life and death and have a say on how people are transported to the other side. Her ability to just fucking reincarnate people as she pleases, that's a problem, isn't it?
It's from the Eternal City, so Miriel, speaking as any follower of the Erd Tree would, understandably decries Renala's rebirths as forbidden rites. And when I searched for this phrase, forbidden rites, in my dialogue spreadsheet, I stumbled upon cut dialogue from Thops, who confirms that forbidden rites like this did indeed originate in the Eternal City. I don't think it's a coincidence that forbidden rites is the same phrase used for Renala and by Thops as well.
Oh, one more thing. Beware the Albinorics. Accursed souls born of a forbidden rite of the eternal city.
Oh.
So, the Albinaurics. Albinaurics seem to be a reference to the ancient notions of artificial life, and that's something that's supported by the Albinauric blood clot description, which calls them life forms made by human hands.
Impure
According to
lives.
the Albinauric shield, Albinaurics are said to have been created from a primordial drop of dew, which, to me, evokes the Erd tree's own imagery of dew, where drops of life dripped from the Erd tree's branches. It's sort of imitation in that way to me. The ripple blade that is wielded by young Albinaurics echoes this, stating that ripples are thought to be at the origin of their species. Obviously, these are all references to liquid, and it suggests that Albinaurics are born of the same liquid silver that we just discussed. An older description of
I feel like visually that checks out, right? They kind of look like big silver blobs with like big weird black eyes. So like visually that makes sense. It'd be interesting to see.
The blue silver set also confirms
how he
this,
fleshes that out.
calling Albinaurics children of silver. And there are a few different types of Albinauric that can
Look
be
at his little
encountered
belly.
in-game. There are first-generation Albinaurics who have withered legs and are called the Albinaurics of old. And then there are second-generation Albinaurics who resemble frogs and
these
are
little
called
bubbly
the young
guys.
Albinaurics. Let's discuss these first-generation Albinaurics first. As far as enemy models go, there are the men, who are commonly the subject of torture and genocide, and then there are the women, who seem to have learned to defend themselves as Albinauric wolfback archers. This is probably a good time
Nice.
to mention, this isn't the only example in this video where the women of the culture are far more dexterous than the men. All of the Black Knives are
Slay.
women, the Nox swordstresses defend the Knight Maiden.
It's this isn't relevant at all, by the way. I just had a fleeting thought and I thought, why not interrupt the enjoyment of my lovely viewers and pause in the middle of the video? But is this not also reminiscent of so I'm playing Sekiro at the moment, if you didn't know. If you want to watch the playthrough, please do. But I just got to the gun fort in Sekiro, which is basically a fortress of badass women wielding shotguns, fending for themselves in like the deep sunken valley of the world, and it just seems to be reminiscent of this, maybe a slight trope that Miyazaki leans on. Groups of women that have learned to fend for themselves. I find that quite intriguing.
Who are of the highest rank. And if we're talking about rank, then Caria and its princesses as well are a prime example
Very
of
fair.
that.
Very
Speaking
fair.
of Caria, actually, Pidia is an example of an Albinauric man that serves Caria, and other Albinauric men in Caria have clearly learned
He's not
glintstone
okay, is
sorcery,
he?
not to mention Loretta, but maybe that's the story for another time. Moving on to the second generation Albinaurics. As newer Albinaurics in the lands between, the formula for these artificial humans seems to have been improved, as they now have legs, which they put to comically good use, although Thops in his cut dialogue does say that they've lost the use of their tongues. So they really
gross.
haven't got the formula quite right. There's something also going on with their heads, which From Software themselves call dumpy and
I don't know,
frog-like.
I think they look
You
good.
can even loot the Albinauric mask, which is literally just their own face, skinned in an act of malicious mockery. And I really shouldn't laugh, but it is kind of funny, admittedly, that even Elden Ring players are also guilty of genociding helpless Albinaurics. There's this site in Mogwin Palace where it's just far and away the best way to farm runes, and thousands of players just kill these Albinaurics.
Yeah, that's the place where you can shoot the I can't remember what it's called. It's like that ugly rotting death bird thing in the middle of the Crimson Swamp, right? You can shoot it from up on the cliff, and then you can turn around and genocide all of these Albinaurics while they're just napping, which makes me feel really bad about
over
myself.
and over again. And it's just the perfect example of gameplay matching lore. Anyway, with all of this terrible shit happening to Albinaurics, frankly, just for the sheer audacity of them simply existing, it's no surprise that they see Miquella's Halig Tree as a haven, but in talking about that, we're getting far
Misfit
away
Clan.
from the Eternal Cities, so let's get back to there. So, it appears the Eternal Cities weren't content with just birthing silver tears and albinorics, because the Dragonkin, too, were born in the Eternal City. There are a tragic few that you can fight down there, and unlike the real stone dragons up above, they knew no true sky nor true lightning. It seems these Dragonkin were created, I think, with the intent of achieving a sort of immortality.
Wow.
Something that is suggested by the Dragon Scale Blade, which is an ice lightning weapon that reads, "A weapon made by sharpening a gravel stone scale, thought to be the source of ancient dragon immortality into an unclouded blade."
It seems like any attempt at immortality or gaining immortality in Elden Ring will only be met with some kind of punishment, whether it be immediate or something that warps you into some twisted version of yourself. Yeah, like these dragons that live below ground, they don't look great. And if they are meant to be representative of things that crave immortality, then that's probably why. It also puts me in mind of old King Alan in Demon Souls and how he basically just ends up being a slug. I can't remember the lore behind that or if I ever even read about it, but I'm now wondering if he ended up like that because he chose to try and become immortal and then ended up being a little sloppy slug boy. Wouldn't actually surprise me knowing what I know now about Elden Ring, so...
Alas, the Dragonkin soldiers never attained immortality and perished as decrepit, pale imitations
That's
of their
sad.
skyborn kin.
That is sad.
There's the word, imitation, again.
Imitation,
And
yeah.
interestingly, just like the Fingerslayer Blade is this hidden treasure of the Eternal City that is capable of harming the Greater Will, ancient dragon smithing stones, too, are a hidden treasure of Faram Azula, capable of creating weapons that can slay a god. So, like so many other things in this video, the Dragonkin almost seem like they are imitations that were born with a malign purpose.
That's sad.
But just like Renala's children and the first-gen Albinorics, these imperfect births only led to withered legs and a pitiful existence.
Oh man, that sucks.
And now we finally arrive at the third city, the nameless Eternal City, which is located deep beneath the Erd Tree at the Deeproot Depths, and it's lost its sky, its name, and even all traces of the Nox.
This
And
place
I
is
believe we
very
know
creepy.
exactly what is to blame for all of this. Astel, Bastard of the Void, is responsible. According to Astel's remembrance, it is a malformed star, born in the lightless void far away. And with all the force of a falling meteor, it seems, Astel destroyed an Eternal City and took away their sky. Logically, this nameless Eternal City is that Eternal City he destroyed, since it's absolutely devastated and it is missing its false night sky. And when the description says Astel took away their sky, I believe that's really literal. I think Astel really did take it away, far away. Because we don't fight Astel anywhere near the nameless Eternal City, we fight it way further south. Almost as if Astel ruined the nameless city, then flowed all the way down the Ainsel River to the south, past Noxtella, and into an enormous cavern where it set up a suspiciously familiar night sky. The Eternal Darkness spell tells us that it's this manifestation of the despair around the ruin of the Eternal City, and the spell in question is essentially this black hole with a powerful gravitational force drawing
Very cool.
everything into it. The Astel don't seem like these super sentient beings to me, so what if they were mere animals, just drawn towards a sort of black hole, or maybe towards another powerful gravitational force, like a moon? Which brings us back to the city of Noxtella. Exploring Noxtella's tallest towers rewards you with the legendary Moon of Noxtella talisman, a treasure of theirs that represents the lost Black Moon. This moon apparently was once the guide of countless stars, and might have served as a sort of artificial moon below ground. But tragically, it seems this black moon was shattered into pieces, because fragments of this moon can be found in memory stones, which have a really similar gameplay function to the talisman, granting you additional memory slots. These stones are rightfully treasured by sorcerers, and above ground, towers evoking those of the Eternal City would be built to protect these precious artifacts.
I've never noticed those
I'm not sure how
similarities.
these fragments were stolen
really cool.
from the city, though over in Nokron there are examples of foreign forces making incursions into the city. These beings are members of the Company of the Fallen Hawk, a company of slaves that were ordered to explore the Eternal City. Logically, these soldiers are slaves of the Golden Order, but who were the Fallen Hawks before their enslavement? Well, there's this one little theory that I quite like by user NoContribution15 on Reddit that suggests that these Fallen Hawks could have once been common soldiers of Stormvale Castle, because
No
these
way.
soldiers once had hawk crest shields and even a Stormhawk king, dating back to ancient times,
No.
back when there was a true storm.
That would explain why Stormvale is literally laden with hawks, by the way. Like, I never quite put two and two together between the hawk insignias and the fact that those birds are everywhere.
In Stormvale.
They are everywhere.
And so, as the theory goes, the crest for this company became that of an inverted hawk, symbolizing their fall and perhaps referencing the inverted towers of the Eternal City that they were
cool.
doomed to explore. As for why they explore the city, the first thing that comes to mind is that they might have been sent here to look for the Fingerslayer Blade, which is the hidden treasure of Nokron, where the Fallen Hawks were sent, although this is mostly all just speculation. Whatever the case, it really helps to characterize these enemies for you. Otherwise, the only other observation we can make is that many of the Fallen Hawks can be found digging hopelessly in the ground, hands bloodied by their...
That's not unlike the slaves above ground, right? In like Limgrave, the little minor guys that look quite similar to these guys, who are always digging into the sides of cliffs and mountains and stuff near like the trolls that are pulling along the trucks and stuff. It seems to be a very common theme, is the powerful overlords kind of ordering around the little guys to do their bidding. Not unlike the world we live in, I suppose.
Long efforts to this day. Torches are an important part of their design, and this reinforces the idea that they're here looking for something, to the point where
Scary.
the band's last embers were used up in their long search, and then they began to burn the bones of their fellows, acquiring the cold ghost flame. And with this new flame in hand, they became dwellers of the underground for all eternity.
That's sad. That's really
Like
sad.
with the Fallen Hawks, there are some really open-ended parts to the stories of the Eternal Cities, some things that are curiosities to me, and I welcome you to try and answer them. For example, the giant thrones with the giant Nox skeletons on them, they're almost a complete mystery, I think.
Yeah.
The only place the game references these
I
thrones
would have loved to find out more
are
about
in the
them,
symbols for night sorceries
Guess that's
and bubble
not gonna
sorceries
happen.
as well. Beyond that, they're clearly a central part of Nox culture, though we don't know what purpose these beings had. Below each one, though, you can loot Great Ghost Glovewort, which were given in tribute to those who died the most glorious of deaths, in the hope their stories would become legend. So it seems the Nox not only venerated these beings with giant thrones, but that their spirits as well were considered to be heroic, for their deaths were glorious. Another curiosity is the distorted bodies that are found in the Eternal Cities.
Yeah.
These erupt from the ground, and many buildings as well, of the Nox.
This is another great example of just I said it in the last video, so I won't go in it too much, but the attention to detail in the environment, making you second guess everything. You're like, where did these bodies come from, and are they going to come to life and try and kill me?
Are these
Very valid
other
questions.
inhabitants of the city? Are their deaths related to the giants? What are these? And finally, there are the
exactly.
gargoyles that are found in the nameless Eternal Cities, with misshapen, ruined bodies. None of
Ugh.
these gargoyles have been mended, but those that are mended with black corpse wax, and they serve Malakath, the Black Blade.
Bit of kintsugi.
Many of you will remember
on their
that
bodies.
2 valiant gargoyles defend the path from Nokron to the Deeproot Depths, where the nameless Eternal City is.
Yep.
And interestingly, it's a coffin that takes you up there, suspended on a golden script. This golden script reminds me of the description of the cipher Pater, which reads, "The furtive inscription appears to hang in the air, the language of light spoken by the 2 fingers." It makes sense that the 2 fingers would be aligned with these gargoyles that serve Malakath, and maybe some power of the 2 fingers is what takes you up to the nameless Eternal City in this coffin. Speaking of coffins, there's another coffin that you ride down from the Grand Cloister to Astel's lair, and
Very
there are a ton of
gothic.
coffins found
Big
in
fan.
the Eternal Cities in general. Beyond being some absurd method of transport, perhaps sending remains along the river was some sort of burial rite? At any rate, many of these coffins have been waylaid along the Ainsel River tunnels, where ants feast upon the remains. And there's something fascinating going on with the ants as well. A lot of these have these enormous abdomens.
way is there lore
These
about
ants
these
in
friggin'
particular
ants.
are based off honeypot ants, which essentially function in nature as these living sources of food storage for the colony.
Ugh.
The Elden Ring variant drop one of the most valuable runes in the Lands Between. They drop a Newman's rune, which makes a lot of sense because these ants are feasting upon corpses, and we did speculate earlier that Newman are indelibly tied to the Eternal Cities. I could speculate further, but again, I'd welcome your thoughts on these curiosities.
Vaati, I don't have any thoughts. Not a single thought under this bleach blonde hair. I'm blown away.
Exploring the Lands Between in the modern era, it's clear that the Eternal Cities have had this significant cultural impact upon many things that we find above ground. You can take the walking mausoleums, for example. These have really explicit Eternal City architecture, which is something that you can't help but notice when you see one of them wandering down in the nameless Eternal City. These mausoleums, it seems, were appropriated from the Eternal Cities to house the remains of soulless demigods of the Golden Order, something that suddenly became very necessary to do after Godwyn's death. And this tracks because the Eternal Cities do have a bit of a history with spirits. We mentioned earlier that they entomb their heroic spirits with legendary glovewort, but even the rebirth monuments above ground that you need to summon spirits look kind of like Eternal City constructs. So I speculate that these might have been pioneered by the Nox, who, even if they didn't use these to summon spirits, they definitely might have used them to summon puppets, because puppetry is an invention of the Eternal Cities. To create a puppet of someone, you need them to drink a potion made of starlight shards,
This is what
which are a
Seleucus
prized
does,
item that was
right?
once used in
Is
the
that his
Eternal
name,
City
Seleucus?
as an ingredient in intoxicating drafts. Starlight shards are used for this because the stars command people's fates, and even the fates of the demigods, and so they can be used in potions given to create puppets with commanded fates. We know of 2 such puppets from the Eternal City, the Night Maiden and Swordstress puppets, who became puppets of their own volition. So keen were they, it seems, to serve the Eternal Cities.
Wow.
But when you look at all the puppet summons that you can get in Elden Ring, these 2, the Night Maiden and the Swordstress of the Nox, these 2 are a bit of a special case because most puppets we find are actually controlled against their will and are extremely unwilling to serve their masters. An excellent example of this are the puppets that are controlled by Seleucus, or should
That's
I
what
say
I
Pidia,
said.
who turn on him immediately when they're given the chance. These puppets are
he's a
Knights of the
dick.
Cuckoo, a faction that are explicitly aligned against Caria, and yet these knights are forced to fight on Caria's behalf here in Caria all the same. Carians also seem to have appropriated a lot of the tools of the
The
Eternal
subtitles,
Cities,
oh
like
dear.
puppetry and inverted towers as well, which is only natural considering how much they actually have in common with the Eternal Cities. Carians are descended from astrologers, who also venerated the night sky. Another example of an invention of the Eternal Cities that the Carians use is found at the Church of Vows, which features a Nox statue taken straight out of the Eternal Cities. Here at the church, Radagon famously repented his territorial aggressions and cleansed himself with celestial dew. Celestial dew is another draft of the Eternal Cities. It's called a night tier, which
This is mad.
reverses all antagonization.
I think what's mad to me is how much comes from these Eternal Cities and how, like, missable they are. Am I right thinking you don't have to go down into any of them? I can't think. I don't know if you do.
And
really?
moves fate
I'm not sure if
backwards
that's
in a
right.
sense to a time or a feeling before those antagonizations took place. And eventually, faraway descendants of the Eternal would finally be found above ground as well. This is in Celia, within Caelid. Gowry calls Celians descendants of the Eternal, and in addition to having one of those signature thrones at the center of the city, there's also a couple of Nox bosses here. And finally, Celians were famed for their Knight class of sorceries, which their assassins made good use of. The Celians were also really proficient at turning invisible, which is an art that the Black Knives used, since they are,
Don't I
after
know
all,
it.
also scions of the Eternal Cities. And it's just amazing how it all overlaps in the end. And in the end, another group would seek inroads to Nokron. This is when we play the game. These were Iji, Blythe, and Rani. Rani is a character that inherits a lot of the Nox's legacy.
Sweet group.
She becomes the final chapter in a story that they started to tell so long ago. Prepare to cry, because I can't wait to cover her story properly, as it deserves. But before I go, I want to share a quick word about Audible. Speaking of people...
I'm not ready to cry at Ronnie's story. I'm really not, because I'm a real crier, and that's what I'll do. Okay, wow, I feel like I just learned a hell of a lot about a lot of things that I've never thought about, which was quite overwhelming. I don't know how you guys feel. I know that watching this time wasn't as chatty as the last couple of Elden Ring lore reacts we've done, but I think it's because the first few I kind of knew what Vaati was talking about, and it was a lot more thematic and conceptual, so I kind of could draw my own conclusions and make points of my own, whereas this does feel a lot like trying to unpick history and trying to piece things together and diving into whole races and societies that I've never thought of, like the Nox. I don't think I gave them a second thought, which is absolutely mad. I didn't realise how much like the Eternal Cities played into the history of Elden Ring's lore and how important they were. So I feel like I've really learned something there, and now I'm really hoping that, you know, in the DLC maybe we'll get an underground area with another Eternal City. That would be so awesome. I'd love to know what you guys thought of those two lore videos. If you have any input, let me know. Anything that particularly interests or excites you out of that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm glad that you're enjoying these videos as well. It's nice to do my Elden Ring research with you guys. It's just fun and I'm enjoying it. So until next time, take care. I'll see you very soon.